Beneath a stormy night sky, a frail German shepherd mother clawed her way out of a pit where she and her pups had been left to die. Her scarred body spoke of years of cruelty, yet her eyes still burned with the will to protect her young. When a stranger stepped into the darkness, everything changed, sparking a battle, not just for survival, but for truth, against a silence that had ruled the town for years. What followed was a fight that no one could ignore. But in the end, what did they uncover? The land was empty, swallowed by dusk, a place where even the wind seemed hesitant to linger. Long abandoned fields spread outward like scars, their weeds brittle and yellow, their fences broken and half-buried under creeping vines. In the middle of this forgotten patch of earth yawned a pit, an old excavation perhaps, once dug for stone, now nothing more than a hollow left to rot. Its walls were crumbling slick with mud and mold. The smell that rose from it was foul, a mix of rust, stagnant water, and the sourness of decay. It did not feel like part of the earth anymore. It felt like a wound. And from above, that wound came laughter. Sharp, shrill, and merciless, the voices of boys cracked through the evening. They leaned over the rim, their faces hidden against the dimming light, but their sounds filled the space, bouncing off the walls, multiplying until the pit seemed alive with taunts. A rock dropped. Then another. They struck the bottom with dull, wet thuds, splashing mud against the hunched body below. Each stone was punctuated by jeers, cruel words tossed as carelessly as the rocks themselves. At the bottom lay a dog. A mother. Her body was broken down to its barest shape. Skin stretched over bones, fur worn away in patches, her ribs jutting like bars of a cage. Every breath rattled through her chest, shallow and thin, but even in this wreckage of a body she shielded her pups. With every stone that clattered too close, she pressed herself over them, wrapping her fragile frame around their smaller, trembling bodies. She was a wall against the cruelty raining from above, a wall made of nothing but stubbornness and instinct. One rock struck her shoulder. She flinched, muscles locking in pain, but made no sound. To cry out would mean nothing but giving those voices what they wanted. Her silence was heavier than any growl. The pups whimpered pitiful sounds in the stale air. They nosed against her, desperate for milk her body could no longer provide. Their mouths searched blindly, finding only exhaustion. Their cries were small, but in the echo of the pit they sounded like alarms, fragile reminders that life still pulsed here. The boys above found pleasure in it. "She's finished," one voice crowed. "Won't see the morning." Another snickered sharper. "Let's end it faster." A stone landed inches from the pups. They squealed, panic piercing the air. The mother tightened around them, ribs shaking under the strain. Her eyes lifted to the circle of light above the only fragment of the sky she could see. In those eyes burned something fierce. Not hope, not exactly. Hope belonged to the unbroken. What burned in her was defiance, a refusal written into every fiber of her body. Then the laughter dwindled. Rocks no longer fell. The boys' voices thinned to murmurs and finally dissolved into the night. Their footsteps retreated across the fields, fading into the murmur of insects and the rising hush of wind. Silence followed. But it was not peace. It was the silence of abandonment, heavy with threat. The kind of silence that asks, "What will kill you first, time, hunger, or fear? The circle of sky shrank as dusk deepened. Shadows crawled down the pit walls, climbing over mudslicks, filling corners with blackness. The water at the bottom grew darker, opaque, and gleaming in the dim light a mirror to nothing but despair. The smell of rot thickened, pressing against the lungs of everything trapped below. The mother dog did not move. Her body was shaking, but she stayed rigid, her eyes never leaving the rim above. She licked the pups again and again, each stroke of her tongue, both reassurance and plea. Stay alive. Stay quiet. Stay with me. Her ears twitched at every rustle above, waiting for another stone, another laugh. None came. Still, she did not sleep. Sleep would mean surrender. Sleep would mean leaving them exposed. Her mind was a blur of instinct and memory. She had known hands before hands that struck, that chained, that discarded. Every object dropped into her world had been a weapon. Trust was not in her blood anymore. Only endurance remained. The pups whimpered again, their cries weak, then subsided into faint whines, exhaustion overtaking even hunger. Their bodies pressed into her warmth. Though her warmth was fading, her frame too thin to keep the cold from gnawing at their small bones. Above, the wind shifted. It carried the metallic smell of rust and the sharp tang of rain brewing. The sky at the rim had turned slate gray, with the first stars faintly piercing through. It looked impossibly far away, like another world. The pit was no longer just a hole in the ground. It had become a cage of shadows and mud, a place that demanded sacrifice. Each heartbeat inside it felt like defiance against an entire world that had decided these 3 lives did not matter. Still, she did not cry out. Her silence was her last armor. Her gaze, unwavering, was her final weapon. The night descended in full. The boys' laughter had long gone, but its echo clung to the walls, lingering like ghosts. The only sounds now were the shallow breaths of the pups and the faint drip of water seeping down the walls, drop by drop, like the ticking of a clock counting down. And in that suffocating dark she waited, not with hope, but with fire. Her eyes stayed open. They would not close. Not yet. The night had deepened, and the pit was steeped in silence so complete that even the whimper of the pups seemed to carry like thunder. The mother dog lay rigid, every muscle taut beneath her mangy coat, her eyes fixed on the circle of sky above. Darkness had replaced the laughter of boys, but their absence was no comfort. Silence could wound in its own way, pressing down heavy and suffocating. Then another sound. Not the shriek of cruel voices, not the crash of a rock. This sound was slower, more deliberate, the scrape of a boot on dirt. A pause. Then another step, heavier, slower still. The mother stiffened, her ears pricked, her lips curled faintly back, a low vibration building in her throat. She gathered the pups tighter, her ribs rising fast as she waited for the next blow. A shadow appeared above, blotting out part of the sky. At first it was shapeless, just a bulk against the dim. Then it leaned forward, and a face emerged from the dark. The lines of it were cut, deep worn by age and sun. A cap shaded his brow, but his eyes caught what little light the sky offered, steady, searching, marked by something she had never seen from above, that pit weight, not malice. The man crouched near the rim, his boots scraping against loose stones. His voice came down low, almost a murmur. "Easy girl," he said. The sound of his words was slow, heavy with breath. "I see you." The dog froze. Her body pressed hard against the mud wall, her teeth bare, though no sound left her mouth. She had learned to measure voices, to listen past words, into the marrow of their intent. This one was different. It wasn't sharp, it didn't cut. It carried something else, patience. Still, patience was not trust. The pups whimpered again. The man leaned closer, peering down his jaw, tightening when his eyes fell on them. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. His throat worked, his lips parting as if he would speak, but instead he pulled back from the rim, his cap tipping low. For a terrible moment, the dog thought he was leaving. Leaving her as the others had, abandoning her and her pups to silence. But then the scrape came again. Rope against dirt. A rough sound, strained and careful. She lifted her head, ears, swiveling eyes locked on the edge. His voice came once more, steady as before. "Don't move. I'll get you out." He lowered something into the pit, a crate old wood bound with frayed rope. It descended slowly, bumping against the walls, swinging as he steadied it from above. The dog tensed, her muscles coiled, her eyes following it warily as it landed with a muffled thunk in the mud. The scent of old wood, of rope and earth mixed with the stench already choking the pit. The man spoke again. "Test it first," he muttered to himself, tugging the rope, checking the weight. His hands strained against it, making sure it would hold. Then silence. The rope groaned once more, but this time from his boots, sliding against the rim as he began to descend. He lowered himself carefully, the rope burning against his palms, his breaths heavy. Mud streaked his jeans as he pressed against the walls, his boots finding uncertain footing. When at last his feet hit the bottom, the dog's growl broke the silence. Low, raw, a warning more than a promise. The man crouched slowly, his palms open, his movements deliberate. He didn't reach for her, didn't push forward. He just lowered himself until his eyes were level with hers. "Name's Jack," he whispered, as though the name mattered to anyone but himself. "You're not dying here. Not you, not them." The pups stirred, their small cries trembling through the pit. Jack's gaze flicked toward them, then back to their mother. He didn't move closer. He waited. The rain above thickened drops, trickling into the pit, splattering across his shoulders, sliding down the dog's scarred fur. One breath. Two. The dog's nostrils flared, catching his scent, earth, rope, sweat, and something else, time. He smelled of years lived hard, not of youth's cruelty. She inched forward, her body trembling, her nose stretching cautiously toward the hand he had lowered. Not close enough to touch, just close enough to smell. "That's it," Jack murmured, exhaling slow. "Good girl." He moved then just enough to lift one of the pups. His hand was rough but careful, scooping the fragile body and settling it into the crate lined with cloth he had laid there. The mother stiffened her legs, digging into the mud, her teeth flashing in warning. Jack froze, meeting her eyes. "I'll bring him back down if you want," he said softly. "But they need air. They need out." The seconds stretched. Water dripped. The pup whimpered in the crate. The mother trembled, torn between instinct and the fire in his voice. Finally, she let him lower the second pup, beside the first. Their tiny bodies pressed against one another, shivering. Only when his hands brushed against her side did she growl, guttural and deep. Jack didn't flinch. "You're stronger than they think," he murmured. "Stronger than me, maybe. But you can't climb. So I'll climb for you." He gripped the rope, the crate swinging as he began to pull. His boots slipped in the mud, his arms straining, but inch by inch he raised the crate toward the light. The pups squealed the sound, sharp and fragile, as they rose higher. The dog's eyes followed her body pressed against the ground, her ears pinned back, as if each inch of distance cut her open. Jack hauled until the crate reached the rim. He set it safely at the top, the pups curling into one another, small and alive against the cold night air. He paused, catching his breath, his chest heaving, sweat and rain mingling on his face. Then he looked down again. The mother remained below her eyes, glowing faintly, the fire within them refusing to fade. Mud clung to her body, water pooling around her legs, but she did not move. She had spent her life expecting cruelty. To trust was to invite pain. Jack spat into the mud, tightening the rope again. "Your turn," he said. His voice was rough, but there was no mockery in it. Only finality. The rain began to fall harder, pattering against the rim, streaking down the walls. Thunder rolled in the distance, a low growl that seemed to echo hers. Jack crouched once more, lowering the rope loop he had tied. "You've made it this far," he said. "Don't stop now." The dog did not move. Her eyes cut through the dim, locked on his face, suspicion burning deep. She sniffed at the rope, jerked back, growled again. Her mind knew every object dropped here had meant death. Rope was no different. Jack didn't press. He'd stripped off his jacket, old canvas soaked through in seconds, and slid it closer to her across the mud. His scent clung to it, a piece of himself laid down in offering. She stiffened, but didn't snap. The pups barked weakly from above, their cries floating down. The mother's head lifted, torn between the fear of this man and the call of her young. "That's right," Jack whispered, seizing the moment. "They need you. They don't make it without you. Let me get you back to them." Her pause shifted, not retreating this time, just shifting. Her body trembled, her ears flattened, but she stepped onto the jacket. Jack's breath caught. His hands worked carefully, slipping the rope around her chest. Not too tight, steady, almost reverent. "There we go," he murmured, as if to himself. "Just hold on." The dog stood stiff, unsure, her eyes burning into his. The pups whined from above, rain slashed harder across the rim, and the rope strained as Jack tested the weight. For the first time, the possibility of leaving the pit flickered across the night. Not certainty. Not yet. But something fragile, trembling, almost like hope, and in the mother's hesitant step, in the way she stood on his jacket without retreating, that fragile hope took its first breath. Rain began as a mist, fine and cool, slipping through the rim of the pit. Then it thickened, growing heavy, each drop slapping against mud already loosened by weeks of storms. The pit walls turned slick in seconds, the thin trickle of water gathering into rivulets that carved lines down the earth, washing dirt into the pool at the bottom. Jack felt it on his shoulders, soaking into his shirt, plastering the brim of his cap against his brow. He squinted upward. The sky was closing in clouds, knotted tight, ready to burst in full. He pulled on the rope, testing the knots. The crate swayed at the rim where the pups cried faintly, their tiny voices breaking through the drumming of rain. They were safe for now, shivering in the cloth he'd packed into the crate. But their mother still stood at the bottom of the pit, the rope loop around her chest, her paws planted in the sucking mud. Jack tightened his grip. "Come on, girl," he muttered, his voice rough, steady against the roar of water. "Don't quit on me now." The dog's eyes glowed in the dim, fixed on him. Her body trembled, but she didn't retreat. She stood on his jacket, sodden now, her fur-plastered flat ribs heaving. He tugged gently on the rope, and she stiffened, claws digging into the mud. She growled once, low and ragged, not at him, but at the fear in her own chest. Jack braced his boots against the wall, his muscles coiling. He pulled. The rope, strained fibers stretching, cutting into his palms. The dog lifted a few inches mud, peeling from her legs with a wet, sucking sound. Then she slid back down with a splash, her paws scrabbling the growl bursting raw from her throat. Easy, Jack shouted above the storm. He steadied the rope, his breath already ragged. The rain poured harder now, a curtain that blurred the rim above. Lightning cracked somewhere far off, its light flickering pale across the pit. He crouched closer, forcing calm into his tone. "It's just us, girl. You and me. You've got to fight with me." Her ears twitched, pressed flat, but she didn't bolt. That fire still burned in her eyes. Jack pulled again, harder this time. His boots slid in the mud, his back screaming, but the dog lifted higher, her chest clearing the ground. She flailed, claws scratching the wall. The rope bit into her skin, her growl breaking into a sharp bark. She slipped again, crashing back into the mire, splattering him with mud. Jack cursed under his breath, gripping tighter. His knuckles whitened veins straining against his skin. The rain soaked everything, his palms slick against the rope. He spat, shaking his head, then tried again. Not stopping, he growled. "Not leaving you down here." The pups cried from above, thin, desperate sounds that sliced through the storm. The mother's head snapped upward at the sound. She barked, throat-raw eyes blazing. Her legs shifted weight forward now. For the first time, she pushed against the rope instead of fighting it. Jack heaved. Mud slipped his shoulders, burned his chest, hammered, but she rose. Inch by inch, dragging against the wall, claws scoring lines in the wet earth. Her body slammed back once, almost tearing the rope from his hands, but Jack roared, pulling harder, his muscles trembling with the strain. "Climb!" he shouted. "Climb, damn you!" The dog lunged her claws, finding a fragile grip. She kicked, scraping, scrabbling mud flying into her eyes. Jack hauled every muscle, screaming the rope slicing into his palms. She slipped again, her body slamming against the wall, and for a heartbeat Jack thought the rope would snap. But then she lunged once more, desperate feral, her claws digging deep. Her front paws caught the edge. For a frozen second, she dangled there, half in the pit, half out. Her hind legs thrashed against the wall, mud raining down her body, twisting as she fought gravity itself. Jack bellowed, pulling with everything left in him. Lightning split the sky, the flash illuminating her straining body, the rope taut, his face clenched in pure effort. With one final heave, he dragged her over the rim. She tumbled onto the wet grass, collapsing beside the crate, where her pups squealed, wriggling against one another. Jack fell to his knees, chest heaving, mud dripping from his arms, his palms raw and burning. The rain lashed his face, mixing with sweat with the ache of every muscle. He let the rope fall into the pit, where it slapped into the mud below, useless now. The dog lay trembling, her sides rising too fast, her eyes wide, burning even in exhaustion. Her pups wriggled toward her, pressing against her belly, tiny mouths squeaking. She curled herself around them, her head dropping over their backs, her eyes closing for the first time since the stones had fallen. Not in surrender, but in relief. Jack sat back against the rim, his chest thundering. For a long moment he did not move. He only listened to the storm raging across the open fields, to the shallow breathing beside him, to the fragile chorus of life that had refused to die in that pit. Thunder rolled again, closer now. Jack dragged a sleeve across his face, streaking mud across his cheek. He turned to look down into the pit. The rain hammered its floor, turning it into a churning mire, water pooling fast. If he had waited another hour, maybe less, the pit would have become a grave. He glanced at the 3 bodies pressed together beside him. The pups trembled in their mother's fur, their cries weakening, but steady, their tiny hearts still pounding. The mother lifted her head just enough to look at him, her eyes still wary, still wild, but different now. Suspicion had not left, but for the first time the sharp edge of fear was duller. Jack exhaled. The storm slashed lightning across the sky, searing the world in white for an instant. It illuminated everything: the sodden field, the rim of the pit, the shadows of weeds bending under the weight of rain. The pit yawned behind them, black and endless, a reminder of what they had just clawed out of. The 3 huddled together alive on the earth above. Jack stared at them, his arms trembling from the effort, his throat raw from the shouts he had forced through the storm. He let his eyes close for a moment, just long enough to catch his breath. When he opened them again, the dog was still watching him. "You're out," he whispered, his voice nearly swallowed by the thunder. "You're safe. For tonight, that's enough." The pups whimpered, curling tighter. The mother lowered her head again, pressing her nose into their fur. The rain poured on relentless, washing mud from their coats and rinsing away the stench of the pit. The storm still raged, but above the rim, beneath the lightning, there was life. And in that fragile moment, muddy, battered, exhausted, there was something else too. The first spark of survival, unyielding against the night. The storm stretched across the plains like an endless sheet of iron. Jack's truck rattled against the gravel road headlights, cutting only a narrow path through the downpour. The windshield wipers swung furiously, but the rain still streaked in rivers across the glass, blurring the world beyond. Every bump in the road jolted the crate in the back seat where the pups lay wrapped in damp cloths that barely kept them warm. The mother pressed against them, her body hunched, her fur plastered to her ribs. She hadn't taken her eyes off Jack since climbing into the truck. He gripped the wheel, tighter, knuckles whitening. The old vehicle groaned as it fought the flooded lanes, water spraying up against its sides. The air inside smelled of wet dog mud and the sharp metallic scent of rope burns still on his hands. Jack stole glances at the rearview mirror. Each time the same image stared back, the dog's amber eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, unblinking, suspicious, alive. "Almost there," he muttered under his breath, though the words were for himself as much as for her. The miles stretched slow and heavy until finally the familiar outline of his farmhouse flickered into view. The porch light was dim, the bulb shivering against the storm, but it was enough to mark home. Jack pulled into the drive, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the silence that followed. Rain hammered the roof, but inside there was only the sound of 3 small lives breathing behind him. "All right," he said softly, twisting to face them. "Let's get you in." He carried the crate first, shielding it against his chest as he kicked the door open with his boot. Warmth spilled out dry air, heavy with the scent of wood smoke, and old coffee, the remnants of a fire, still glowing in the stove. He set the crate by the hearth, unwrapped the pups, and let them crawl out onto the towels he'd spread on the floor. They stumbled, their tiny paws, slipping tails, twitching squeals, sharp but full of stubborn will. The mother followed cautiously, her steps stiff, her eyes sweeping across the room. She circled once, ears pinned, every muscle coiled for flight. The walls were strange, the ceiling too low, the smells foreign. She stopped at the threshold of the kitchen, and lay down with her body angled toward the door, her eyes locked on Jack. She would not settle, not yet. Trust was too high a price. Jack crouched near the fire, rubbing his hands together against the heat. He let her watch. He made no move toward her, only tended to the pups, drying their fur with the towel, rubbing their small bellies, coaxing life back into their frail bodies. They whined, but they didn't resist. When he lifted his gaze again, the mother's eyes burned into his. "You'll learn," he said quietly. "Takes time." For a while, the house filled only with the crackle of the fire and the faint yips of the pups. Rain battered the roof. Thunder rolled in the distance, but inside was warmth. The contrast was almost cruel, outside a storm that could drown, inside a fire that promised safety. Yet the divide was fragile. One gust of wind rattling the windows was enough to remind Jack how thin the walls were against the world. Later, as he crouched near the mother, he noticed the fur along her back shift under the firelight. A line caught his eye, a jagged seam running diagonally across her spine where the coat grew uneven. He leaned closer, careful, his hands steady. She growled once, a warning low and deep, but she didn't lunge. "Easy," Jack murmured. He reached his fingers, brushing through the damp fur, and there it was, a scar. Long, deep, and old, carved into her flesh by more than accident. His stomach tightened. He traced its edge with his eyes, not daring to press. "They've hurt you before." He whispered, his voice heavy. "Not just tonight. Not just this pit." The scar told a story too cruel to imagine whip's blades' chains. Not one wound, but a history of them, layered and deliberate. Whoever had left that mark hadn't seen her as a living thing, only as something to use until it broke. Jack sat back on his heels, the weight of it pressing against his chest. He rubbed his face with his hands, dragging the mud down his skin. The mother didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, sharp, unyielding, but no longer only suspicion. There was something else now, an accusation, perhaps, or a demand. "Do not look away. Do not pretend you don't see." Jack leaned back against the counter, his chest rising heavy. The fire cracked sparks, dancing in the stove. The pups whimpered, crawling across the towels until they pressed into their mother's belly. She shifted, curling around them, her body a wall even in exhaustion. Jack's phone buzzed on the table. The sudden sound cut through the quiet, sharp as a blade. He hesitated, then reached for it. The screen glowed and a name lit up across it. Sheriff Cole. Jack's jaw tightened. He thumbed the call open, raising it to his ear. "Jack," he said flatly. The sheriff's voice came low, almost tired, but with a weight that carried authority. "Got a report tonight. Couple boys bragging in town they tossed some mutt down a pit out by the old field." A pause. "That ring any bells?" Jack's eyes flicked to the dog. She lifted her head at the sound of his voice, her scar catching the firelight. The pups shifted against her. His chest tightened. "I found her," Jack said. His voice was firm, rough. "Alive. She's here. With pups." The sheriff sighed. It was not relief, it was inconvenience. "Jack, listen. I know what you do. You've pulled strays before, and God knows you've patched up worse. But this..." He paused, voice turning hard. "Their folks are saying it was just kids being stupid. You didn't see anything, right?" Jack stared at the scar, at the ribs still rising too fast beneath her fur. His hand trembled against the phone. The silence stretched. His voice came back like gravel. "I saw enough," Jack the sheriff began, but Jack cut him off, his tone low, final. "I said I saw enough, Cole." Silence. Then the sheriff's voice dropped, almost a warning. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know how this county runs. These kids got last names that carry weight. Don't get yourself caught in the middle of it." Jack's hand shook around the phone. His breath came slow, heavy, the taste of iron rising in his mouth. Without another word, he ended the call. The phone dropped onto the table with a dull thud. The storm roared outside. Inside, the fire flickered against the scar on her back, against the wary eyes that would not close. Jack stood there in the silence, his own heart hammering, knowing one truth clearer than anything pulling them from the pit had not been the end. It had only been the beginning. The rain lingered into the morning, softer now, but steady, falling in gray sheets that blurred the edges of the fields. Jack stood at the kitchen window, his coffee cooling in his hand, staring out at the wet horizon. He hadn't slept. Every creak of the old farmhouse during the night had kept him awake, each sound magnified by the weight of Sheriff Cole's words, "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know how this county runs." The sheriff's voice still rang in his ears. The tone had been familiar, the kind used in backroom warnings and barroom whispers. Stay quiet, stay small, stay out of it. Jack knew it too well. He had lived most of his life that way, choosing silence when others suffered, keeping his head down while men with louder voices carved cruelty into the land. He looked over his shoulder. The pups were curled in a box by the stove, twitching in sleep, their bellies finally round after their first full meal. The mother lay close, her head, raised eyes never straying far from Jack. Her scar glowed faintly under the morning light, a jagged reminder of the violence she had endured. Jack set the coffee down, his jaw tightening. Silence had kept him alive, yes, but it had killed pieces of him too. He thought of nights years ago, when he'd walked past men kicking astray by the tracks, saying nothing, doing nothing. He remembered the pitiful look in that animal's eyes, confused, betrayed, just before the world had gone dark. He had carried that look with him ever since, buried under years of excuses. And now Sheriff Cole was asking him to do it again. To look away. To pretend. Jack's hand clenched around the coffee mug until his knuckles whitened. He turned back to the window, rain streaking across the glass. His gut churned with unease, with something darker, shame. By mid-morning, the rain eased, leaving the world slick and shining. Jack pulled on his jacket and stepped outside. The air was sharp, smelling of wet soil and cedar. He crossed the yard to the chopping block, an old oak stump scarred with years of axe blows. The rhythm of work steadied him, splitting logs, stacking them in neat piles against the side of the shed. The thunk of blade meeting wood was sharp, honest, something he could trust. It was while he raised the axe for another swing that he heard the low rumble of an engine. Tires crunching against the gravel drive. Jack straightened, wiping sweat and rain from his brow, his eyes narrowing toward the lane. A truck rolled into view, too clean for country roads, its chrome grille catching the weak sun. It stopped just beyond the gate. Inside sat two boys, hardly men, but already carrying themselves with the arrogance of inherited power. Jack recognized their faces. Sons of landowners. The same boys who had leaned over the pit the night before, stones in their hands, laughter spilling from their mouths as they condemned a mother and her pups. They didn't laugh now. Their smiles were tight, cruel, a different kind of weapon. One leaned out the window, his voice sharp, cutting across the yard. "Heard you've been playing hero, old man." The other snickered, eyes darting toward the house. "Dogs are dead weight. Should have left them where they were." Jack said nothing. He stood with the axe in his hands, his chest rising slow, steady. "You planning on keeping them?" The first boy pressed, his voice laced with mockery. "Because we can make sure they don't last long." The words hung heavy, mixing with the damp air. Jack's grip tightened on the axe. He stepped toward the chopping block and swung the blade, burying into the wood with a crack that echoed through the yard. The boys flinched at the sound, their smirks faltering for the first time. Jack leaned on the handle, his voice low but sharp, the kind that didn't need to be loud to cut. "You step 1 foot past that gate," he said evenly, "and you'll regret it." The yard fell still. The only sound was the dripping of rain from the eaves. The boys stared at him, a moment too long, measuring whether his words carried weight. Then the driver smirked again, but it didn't reach his eyes. He slammed the truck into gear, gravel spitting under the tires as they peeled away. Their laughter trailed behind them, forced, brittle. Jack stood there until the dust settled his hands, trembling on the axe handle. He wasn't young anymore, but he wasn't broken either. Still, he knew the truth. This fight wouldn't be won with muscle or timber. It was a fight of names, of weight, of silence, bought with fear. He pulled the axe free, the wood splitting down the center. His chest rose and fell, his breath heavy in the damp air. He turned slowly toward the house. Through the kitchen window he could see them. The pups curled in their box, the mother standing over them. Her ears pricked, her body angled toward the door. She had heard it all. She knew the threat still lingered. Jack's eyes met hers through the glass. She did not blink. He set the axe against the block, rain dripping from its blade. His voice broke the silence, though no one else was near enough to hear. "They're not done," he whispered. "And neither am I." Inside, the pups shifted, pressing closer against their mother. Her scar caught the light again as she lowered her head over them, unyielding. Jack exhaled slowly, the weight settling deeper in his chest. In that moment, he understood by pulling them from the pit, he hadn't just saved 3 lives. He had stepped into something larger, darker, and far more dangerous. The storm outside had eased, but another was gathering, one that no roof or fire could keep out. And standing in his own yard, with rain dripping from the axe at his side, and 3 pairs of eyes waiting inside, Jack knew he had just crossed the line between safety and war. The rain had not stopped since the night Jack pulled them from the pit. It came steady now, a silver curtain sweeping across the fields, soaking the earth until it smelled of iron and clay. Jack sat at the kitchen table, with the phone still in his hand. Sheriff Cole's words echoing like thunder in his skull. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know how this county runs. These kids got last names that carry weight. Don't get yourself caught in the middle of it." Jack set the phone down slowly, but his hand lingered there, trembling. He rubbed his face, dragging mud and fatigue across his skin. The fire in the stove hissed as a log cracked, sending sparks up the pipe, but the warmth couldn't chase away the cold spreading in his chest. He looked toward the hearth. The pups slept in their box, their sides rising and falling in delicate rhythm. The mother dog lay near them, her head raised, ears twitching at every sound. She never closed both eyes at once. Her scar, raw in the firelight, seemed to accuse him. Jack leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams, his thoughts a storm of their own. He knew the sheriff's voice well. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't advice. It was a warning wrapped in weary familiarity. Cole had been like that for decades, keeping the peace by pretending there was no war holding order, by turning his back when cruelty slipped under the door. Jack's chest tightened. He remembered other times years ago when he had chosen the same path. Nights he'd walked past the tracks where a pack of boys had cornered a stray, their boots slamming into its ribs. Jack had kept walking, then eyes down, telling himself it wasn't his fight. He had heard the sounds fade behind him, the cries swallowed by laughter, and he'd carried that silence home like a weight. Another memory came sharper, a dog chained behind the mill ribs, showing its water frozen in winter. He had seen it day after day and day after day. He had said nothing. By spring the chain hung empty rust, biting through the links. That silence had lived in him ever since heavy and sour. And now Sheriff Cole was asking him to wear it again like an old coat. Pretend it was just boys being boys. Pretend nothing had happened in that pit. Pretend scars were accidents. Jack's hands clenched on the table. He looked at the pups again, the fragile rise of their bellies, the soft twitch of their paws as they dreamed. Silence could kill as surely as any stone. He knew that now. By midday, the rain slowed, falling softer, though the fields still bled water. Jack pulled on his jacket and stepped outside, needing the rhythm of work to quiet his mind. The air smelled of wet cedar, the earth sucking at his boots. He crossed to the chopping block, lifted the axe, and let the weight of it steady him. The thunk of wood splitting was sharp, honest. Each swing drove back the memory of Cole's voice of boys' laughter, of his own long history of cowardice. The work was a kind of prayer, blade wood, crack silence. He had just raised the axe again when he heard it, the low purr of an engine rolling up the lane. Jack lowered the tool, his jaw setting. He turned toward the sound as a truck eased into view. It was too clean for country roads, the kind polished with city wax. Chrome caught what little light the sky offered, shining unnatural against the muted gray. The truck stopped just beyond the gate, its tires crunching gravel. Inside sat two boys. Jack recognized them instantly. The faces were young, still soft around the edges, but their eyes carried the arrogance of names older than the dirt road itself. Sons of landowners, sons of power, sons who had leaned over a pit laughing as stones fell. The driver leaned out the window, his smirk crooked. "Heard you've been playing hero, old man?" The passenger chuckled, his gaze sliding toward the house. "Dogs are dead weight. Should have left them where they were." Jack said nothing. He stood with the axe in his hands, his shoulders squared, his chest rising slow. "You planning on keeping them?" The first boy pressed his tone thick with mockery. "Because we can make sure they don't last long." The words carried easily through the rain, heavier than any stone. Jack's grip tightened. He stepped forward, the axe hanging low. He reached the chopping block and lifted the blade high, his breath filling the silence. With one sharp swing, he buried the edge deep into the wood. The crack split the air, echoing through the wet yard. The boys flinched. For the first time, their smirks faltered. Jack leaned on the handle, his voice low, steady, cutting through the mist like steel. "You step 1 foot past that gate," he said, "and you'll regret it." The yard held its breath. Rain pattered off the eaves. The boys stared, waiting for a tremor, a flicker of weakness. Jack gave them none. The driver's lip curled, but his eyes shifted uneasy. He slammed the truck into gear. Gravel spat from the tires as they peeled away, their laughter trailing thin and hollow behind them. Jack stood still, watching until the dust settled. His hands trembled on the axe handle. He wasn't young anymore, but he wasn't broken either. Still, he knew what this meant. Their words were only the beginning. Threats had roots here, roots that twisted into power, into silence, into names that shielded cruelty from consequence. He pulled the axe free, splitting the log clean through. His chest heaved, his breath ragged in the damp air. He turned slowly back toward the house. Through the kitchen window, he saw them, the pups curled together, tiny and restless, their mother standing over them. Her ears pricked, her body tense. She had heard. She knew danger still lingered. Jack's eyes locked with hers through the glass. She did not blink. He set the axe against the block, the rain dripping from its blade. His voice came low, almost a whisper. "They're not done," he said, "and neither am I." Inside, the pups stirred, pressing tighter against their mother. She lowered her head, curling her scarred body around them, unyielding even in exhaustion. Jack exhaled slowly, the weight of it pressing deeper in his chest. In that moment, he understood. Pulling them from the pit had not ended anything. It had only thrown open the door to something larger, darker, and far more dangerous. The storm outside had eased, but another was gathering, one that no roof or fire could keep out. Jack stood in his yard, rain dripping down his jacket, and felt it settling in. He had stepped into the circle now. Not just a rescuer, not just a witness. He was a part of the fight. And as he looked back through the glass at 3 lives depending on him, he knew there was no way out. The storm had passed, but the night did not settle into peace. The farmhouse creaked under the weight of damp air, its timbers sighing, as though the walls themselves knew unrest. Jack sat in his chair by the stove, the fire low now, throwing more shadows than light. The pups slept in their box, their tiny bellies rising with each soft breath, and the mother kept her usual post a few feet away, stretched out, but alert, her eyes never closing both at once. Jack dozed and woke in fragments, his body weary, but his mind too restless to give itself over fully. It was near midnight when a sound broke the stillness, faint, deliberate, the scrape of metal on earth. Jack's eyes opened. He held still, listening. The wind had died, the rain gone, leaving the world hushed. That noise didn't belong. It came again, shovel against soil, a dull thud followed by the slide of dirt. He rose, pulling on his boots. The mother dog lifted her head, ears pricked, a low growl vibrating in her chest. Jack raised a hand to calm her. "Stay," he whispered. He took the lantern from its hook, shielding its flame with his hand, as he stepped onto the porch. The night was thick, the fields stretching silent under a gray sky. The sound came clearer now from the direction of the old barn. He crossed the yard quickly, mud clinging to his boots, the lantern's glow swinging with each step. The barn loomed ahead, its doors sagging on rusted hinges. Inside smelled of rot and hay long since spoiled. Jack stepped through the threshold, raising the light. At first the barn seemed empty shadows dancing against the walls, beams groaning softly. But then the sound came again, and he followed it to the far corner. There, in the packed dirt floor, was a hole, freshly dug. Dark earth piled around its edges, damp from the recent rain. It wasn't wide, not yet, but its shape was unmistakable. A pit. A warning. Jack's grip tightened on the lantern. His jaw clenched, fury rising sharp and hot in his chest. They wanted him to see. They wanted him to know. A rustle behind him. Jack spun the lantern beam, catching the figure of an old man standing near the barn wall. His shoulders were hunched, his clothes soaked with sweat, though the night was cool. In his hands was a shovel, its blade dark with wet soil. Jack's heart sank. He knew the man Elias, a farmhand, who lived on the edge of town. Age had bent his back, carved hollows into his cheeks, but Jack remembered him once, strong years ago, hauling timber in the heat of summer. Now he looked broken, his eyes wide and hollow. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jack demanded, his voice low but sharp. Elias flinched, clutching the shovel tighter. I didn't want to," he stammered. His voice cracked with the weight of fear. "They made me," Jack stepped closer, anger burning through his fatigue. "Made you dig a hole in my barn." He gestured at the dark pit, rage tightening his throat. "What for? To scare me, to bury them again?" Elias shook his head violently, his hands trembling on the handle. "If I don't do what they say, they'll come for my family. My grandson, he's only 10. They told me they'd put him in the ground instead." His voice dropped to a whisper raw with desperation. "You don't understand what they're capable of." Jack stared at him, breath heaving. His anger flared, but beneath it something colder took root. He did understand. He'd seen it before, cruelty passed down through names and moneymen who never dirtied their hands but left plenty of blood on others. Elias's eyes glistened in the lantern light. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I had no choice." Jack's voice was iron. "There's always a choice, even when it costs." He stepped closer, pointing to the barn door. "Get out of here, Elias. Go home. And don't come back." The old man hesitated, his lips trembling. Then he dropped the shovel with a clatter and shuffled past Jack, his footsteps dragging. The barn door creaked open, then slammed shut, leaving the smell of damp soil and fear hanging in the air. Jack stood alone in the barn, the lantern light trembling across the half-dug pit. His hands shook with fury. He wanted to smash the shovel to fill the hole himself until no trace remained. But he didn't move. He only stared at the dark earth, his mind churning. He had been given a message. They were telling him plainly, "We can reach you. We can dig as many holes as we want. We can take what you care for anytime we choose." Jack's teeth ground together. He turned and strode out into the night, the lantern swinging hard at his side. Back at the farmhouse, the mother dog was waiting at the porch, her body rigid, her eyes locked on him. She could smell the soil clinging to his clothes, could sense the fury boiling off him. The pups whimpered from inside their voices, small in the dark. Jack set the lantern down and crouched, meeting the dog's stare. His voice came low, heavy, with a vow he had carried too long in silence. "They want to put you back in the ground," he whispered, his words trembling with rage. "But I won't let them." The dog blinked slowly, her scar catching the light, her body still coiled but listening. The pups squeaked, pressing closer inside. Jack sat back on his heels, the storm of his thoughts swirling the fire in his chest rising. He had tried silence once. He had lived with it for years. But tonight, standing before the dog who had clawed her way out of death, he knew silence was over. The pit in his barn wasn't just a warning. It was a line drawn in the dirt, and he had already stepped across it. Morning broke slow and gray, the clouds dragging across the horizon like torn cloth. Jack loaded the pups into the crate again, wrapping them with blankets still warm from the stove. The mother resisted at first, bristling when he lifted one pup, but after a moment she relented, circling anxiously, as if checking every move. Her scar shone dull in the morning light, her ribs stark beneath her fur. "Easy, girl," Jack murmured, securing the crate in the back of the truck. "We're not going back to pits today. We're going to get you looked at." The drive into town was quiet. The road was still muddy from rain puddles flashing silver beneath the truck's tires. The mother crouched in the back, pressed against the crate, her eyes never leaving her pups. Jack kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his chest tightening at the sight of her. She was alert, coiled with mistrust, yet something softer lingered in her gaze when it drifted toward the small bodies wriggling under the blankets. The veterinary office sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building with a faded sign and a tin roof that rattled in the wind. Jack parked, killed the engine, and slid out. He had half expected her to bolt when he opened the door, but she stayed pacing tight circles near the crate. Inside, the place smelled of antiseptic sawdust and hay. A bell above the door chimed, and Dr. Moore, a man with round glasses and thinning hair, looked up from a clipboard. His eyes widened when he saw the state of the animals. "Good God, Jack," he said, voice thick with dismay. "Where'd you find them?" Jack's jaw tightened. "In a hole," he muttered. "Thrown there to die." Moore bent low, peering through his glasses at the mother dog. She stiffened, growling low in her throat, her ears flat. Jack placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "He's here to help," he said softly. The exam was slow and tense. Jack stayed beside her, keeping his voice steady while Moore worked. They discovered scars layered upon scars, old wounds from ropes or chains, pressure sores along her ribs from lying too long on hard ground, torn pads on her paws, a jaw that had once been fractured and healed crooked. Worse still, Moore confirmed what Jack had suspected: she had been bred repeatedly, her body worn down by litters forced too close together. Moore's voice was grim. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate. Someone used her until she broke. Jack's throat worked rage hot and sharp behind his ribs. He ran a hand down her back, pausing at the long scar that had first caught his eye in the firelight. She trembled under his touch, but didn't pull away. When it was done, Moore gave him supplies, antibiotics, ointments, and food richer than what she'd had in years. "Take her slow," he said. "She'll fight, but she'll heal." He hesitated, glancing at Jack's face. "But Jack, if she was used like this, there are others. You know that, right?" Jack nodded. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "I know. Underscore, 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 underscore." That afternoon, back at the farm, a figure waited near the fence. Jack recognized him immediately: Elias, the old man from the barn. His shoulders sagged, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets. When Jack climbed down from the truck, the mother growled, her hackles rising. Jack held up a hand. "It's all right," he said quietly, though his eyes were hard on Elias. The old man raised his hands in surrender. "I ain't here to dig," he said hoarsely. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry." His gaze dropped to the mud. "I shouldn't have done it. Shouldn't have let them use me like that." Jack's anger rose quick, sharp, but he held it back. "You put a shovel in my barn," he said. "You dug the shape of a grave. Sorry doesn't fill it back in." Elias flinched. His voice cracked. "You don't know what they said. They told me if I didn't, they'd kill my grandson. He's all I've got left. I believed them. Lord help me, I believed them." His hands trembled as he rubbed his face. "I've been a coward too long." Jack's silence stretched. He saw the truth in the man's eyes. Fear, shame, the hollow look of someone who had spent years bending under pressure until his back broke. It mirrored the weight Jack knew too well, the burden of silence. Finally, Jack spoke, his tone harsh, but not unkind. "If you want to make it right, don't come here asking me to forgive you. Make it right by fighting back." Elias looked up, startled. His lips parted, but before he could answer, the crunch of tires on gravel interrupted them. Both men turned as another truck pulled into the yard. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, her dark hair streaked with gray, tied back in a no-nonsense braid. She wore a heavy coat and mud-stained boots, her eyes sharp as she scanned the scene. When she saw the dogs, her expression softened, then hardened again. "You must be Jack," she said. "Name's Claire. I run the rescue center outside town. Moore called me." Jack studied her, cautious. The mother dog barked once sharp, then lowered her head-tail stiff. Claire crouched, keeping her distance. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" she murmured, her voice gentle, but edged with fire. She looked back at Jack. "This isn't one case. This is a pattern. I've been chasing it for years, but no one will speak. Not the sheriff, not the farmers, not even the victims." Her eyes flicked to Elias. "Until maybe now." Elias shifted uneasily, his shame plain. "I don't want trouble," he muttered. "You already have it," Claire said bluntly. "We all do. The question is whether we fight it." Jack's gaze moved between them. The old man racked with fear, the woman bristling with determination, the dog at his side scarred by years of cruelty. For the first time, the pieces didn't feel scattered. They felt like the beginnings of a map. Inside, around the table, scarred with years of use, Claire spread papers. A county map covered in notes and red pins. Jack leaned over it, Elias standing hesitantly nearby. "Here," Claire said, pointing. "Old mill. Dogs found chained last year. Over here, abandoned farmstead. Same story. Every pin marks a site where animals were dumped, bred, or killed. The same families keep circling back." Jack studied the map, his jaw tightening. Elias's hand shook as he pointed to another spot near the river. "They used to bring crates there, at night. I helped unload once." His voice faltered, but he didn't stop. "I knew it was wrong. I told myself I had no choice. But I did." Claire's eyes softened slightly. "You're making a choice now." The mother dog padded in quietly, her pups tottering behind. She sniffed the edge of the table, then lay down at Jack's feet, her scar catching the lamplight. Jack rested a hand on her head, and she didn't pull away. He looked at Claire, then Elias. "We can't do this alone," he said. "But together, maybe we can start." The three of them leaned over the map, their shadows merging in the flickering light. For the first time, Jack felt the weight of his silence lift just slightly. Not gone, but shifted, carried now by more than one pair of shoulders. The pups yawned, curling against their mother. Elias wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. Claire set another pin in the map with a decisive snap. Trust was still fragile, like glass on the edge of breaking. But it was there. A thread binding three strangers stitched together by scars, guilt, and stubborn hope. And in that dim farmhouse, with rain still dripping outside, a fragile alliance was born. The moon hid itself behind swollen clouds, leaving the countryside soaked in shadow. Jack and Elias moved slowly along the tree line, their boots muffled by damp soil and fallen leaves. The air smelled of rot and rain, a chill clinging to the night that seemed to sink through skin into bone. Jack carried an old camcorder pressed to his chest, its red recording light taped over. Elias clutched a flashlight but kept it switched off, his breath wheezing softly as he struggled to keep up. Ahead, across an open stretch of field, the outline of a barn emerged larger than most, its roof sagging in places, windows boarded over. Yet faint light leaked through the cracks, pulsing irregularly. Voices floated into the night, low and sharp, punctuated by the scrape of metal and the shuffle of movement. Jack crouched behind a fence post, raising the camera. Through the zoom, he caught sight of figures at the barn doors. Men in heavy coats, cigarettes glowing between their fingers. Another figure approached, leading a dog by a chain. The animal stumbled ribs, showing its muzzle bound with rope. It tried to bark, but the sound broke into a rasping whine, muffled by the binding. Elias shifted uncomfortably beside him. "That's them," he whispered. "I told you they bring them here first. Keep them penned up until buyers come." Jack's grip tightened around the camera. He forced himself to steady the frame as the men dragged the dog inside. From within the barn came a chorus of sound barking that had lost its strength. Hoarse cries, claws scraping desperately against wood. The noise cut through him like blades. Inside lanterns swung, throwing uneven light across rows of cages. Jack zoomed in, his throat closing. Dogs of all sizes crammed into wire enclosures, their fur matted, their eyes wide with panic. Some were limp in the corners, unmoving except for shallow breaths. Others hurled themselves against the bars, throats raw from barking that had long since gone hoarse. The smell seemed to reach him even from across the field, waste-rot fear. Money changed hands at the entrance. Jack caught the gleam of bills, passed quickly, men shaking hands before one truck reversed toward the barn doors. The rear gate swung open, revealing empty crates stacked inside. Jack's chest surged with fury. Every instinct screamed at him to run forward, to tear the chains from their hands, to pull those dogs out. His legs twitched, ready to launch, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Elias grabbed his sleeve, eyes wide with terror. "No," he hissed. "Not now. You'll get us both killed, and them too." Jack froze, breathing hard. He wanted to break Elias's grip, to charge anyway, but the old man's words struck like truth. This wasn't the pit. These weren't stones thrown by boys. These were men with power, with weapons, with names that silenced sheriffs and bought neighbors. Charging blind would mean nothing but more graves. His hands shook as he refocused the camera, forcing himself to document instead of fight. Each frame burned into him. A man striking a dog that refused to move, a woman counting cash with cold precision, a boy hardly older than Elias's grandson carrying buckets of filthy water to splash over cages. They crouched there for what felt like hours, the night pressing heavier with each passing minute. Finally, when the last truck pulled away and the barn fell quiet, save for the muffled cries within, Jack lowered the camera. His face was pale. Jaw locked, eyes blazing with restrained fury. "Let's go," he muttered. They slipped back through the fields, not daring to speak until the farmhouse rose into view. Claire was waiting on the porch, arms folded, lantern beside her. When she saw their faces, she didn't ask questions. She only led them inside where the map still lay on the table. Jack set the camcorder down with shaking hands. "See for yourself," he said. Claire rewound the tape, her eyes narrowing as the images flickered across the small screen. The barking filled the room, raw and ragged, even through the tinny speaker. She watched without flinching as money exchanged hands, as men dragged broken dogs into cages, as shadows revealed cruelty in its most ordinary form. When the tape ended, she exhaled slowly. "This is it," she said. Her voice carried weight. "This isn't rumor anymore. This is proof." Elias sat heavily in the chair, his hands covering his face. God help me, he whispered. I knew. I knew it all along, and I still dug their holes. His shoulders shook, whether from shame or fear, Jack couldn't tell. Claire looked at him sharply, but her voice softened. Then stop digging graves and start digging them out. Jack stood by the window, his fists clenched at his sides. Rain had started again, thin streaks running down the glass. He stared into the dark, his reflection faint beside the storm. His voice, when it came, was rough, torn from his chest. It's not enough, he said. Claire glanced up. What? This. He gestured to the camcorder, to the map, to the fragile proof they had gathered. His eyes burned. It's a start, but it's not enough. Not until we strip every lie from their mouths. Not until we tear open the whole damn system and show what they've built on blood. The mother dog shifted at his feet, her scarred body curling protectively around her pups. Jack looked down at her, then back at the others. They threw her in a pit, he said, quietly, almost to himself, and she clawed her way back out. Now it's our turn. His voice hardened, a vow forged in fury and shame. We don't stop until every cage is empty. The room fell silent, the storm tapping against the glass like a ticking clock. Jack had crossed the line the moment he pulled them from the mud. Tonight, watching dogs rot behind bars while money changed hands, he knew there was no turning back. The next morning, mist clung to the fields like a veil, soft but suffocating. Jack drove into town with the weight of the night's footage still pressing against his chest. The camcorder sat in the glove compartment, silent but heavy, as though the images inside could seep into the air if he let them. Main Street was quiet. Storefronts sat with their blinds half drawn, the sidewalks slick from rain. People moved in clusters, quick glances passing toward Jack's truck as he parked. He could feel it, the ripple of recognition, the stiffness in shoulders, the conversations cut short. When he stepped into the hardware store, silence met him like a wall. The clerk behind the counter offered only a curt nod. Two farmers by the shelves leaned together, their voices dropping until he couldn't hear. Jack collected the nails and oil he needed, every movement slower than it should have been, his skin prickling under the weight of their eyes. By the time he left, the unease had hardened into something sharper. They knew. Not the details, perhaps, but enough. Sheriff Cole's warning had spread. Jack was stepping where he wasn't meant to, and the town had closed its doors. At midday, he stopped at the diner. The bell over the door chimed, and the smell of fried potatoes and coffee greeted him warm, but strangely thin. He took a booth near the back. Conversations dimmed when he sat, then rose again in guarded tones. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes who had known Jack for years, placed a mug of coffee before him without asking. "On the house," she said quietly. Her glance flicked toward the counter where two men in suits sat stiff as fence posts, their eyes following every move. Jack sipped the coffee, letting the bitterness settle on his tongue. He ate slowly, aware of the tension around him, until a voice from the next booth caught his ear. "You're wasting your time." Jack looked up. The man across from him was older, his face lined deep, his hair thin and white at the temples. His hands shook slightly as he lifted his cup. He didn't look at Jack directly, only at the window where rain streaked the glass. "They'll never listen," the man continued. "Not the sheriff, not the council. They've been turning blind eyes for years." His voice dropped lower. "I lost my dog 3 summers back. Thought she'd run off. A week later, a boy I know told me he saw her tied at the edge of the mill lot. They used her to bait the pits. By the time I went looking, there was nothing left but rope and blood." Jack's chest tightened. His fork hovered above his plate, forgotten. The man's eyes glistened in the dull light. I kept my mouth shut. Thought no one would believe me. Thought maybe they'd come for me next. Been carrying it like a stone in my chest ever since. Finally, he looked at Jack. "You're not the only one who knows. You're not the only one who's seen." Silence stretched between them, heavy but alive. Then the man dropped a few bills on the table and walked out without another word. Jack sat there, his pulse thudding in his ears. The diner bustled again, voices rising, cutlery clinking, but the words stayed with him. Not the only one. When he returned home that evening, the pups tumbled across the kitchen floor, their legs still clumsy but stronger than before. The mother dog sat nearby, watching, as always, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Jack crouched near her, holding out his hand. For days, every attempt had been met with a growl, a warning deep in her throat. Tonight she only stared at him, her breathing steady. Slowly, cautiously, Jack let his hand hover closer. Her ears flicked back, but she didn't move away. His fingers brushed her fur, damp and coarse beneath his touch. She stiffened her muscles taut, but she didn't snap. Instead, she let out a long, weary breath and lowered her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. Jack felt something shift, small, fragile, but undeniable. It was the first surrender of her guard, the first allowance of trust. His throat tightened, and he stroked gently along her scarred back. "You're safe here," he whispered. "I swear it." The pups squealed, clambering over her legs, and she shifted to curl around them, but she did not push his hand away. Jack sat back, his chest heavy with something that felt almost like hope. Later, Elias came by. He stood at the doorway, his hat twisting in his hands, his face lined with unease. Jack let him in, though the mother dog rose immediately, growling low. "It's all right," Jack said, steadying her. He gestured for Elias to sit. The old man lowered himself into a chair, his eyes darting around the room as though expecting shadows to burst through the windows. He leaned forward, his voice rough. "Jack, you need to understand. This isn't just cruelty. It's not just boys throwing stones or men chaining strays. It's business." Jack's stomach tightened. "Business." Elias nodded grimly. "Money changing hands. Dogs bred, sold, traded. Fights held out by the river. Bets bigger than most men see in a year. Families you know by name, they're all tied to it. This town runs on silence and they buy it cheap." His hands shook as he rubbed them together. "They've kept it hidden because no one dares speak. You saw what happens when someone does." Jack leaned back, his fists curling. The words hammered into him with brutal clarity. He had thought it was cruelty, born of malice, boys learning violence from fathers who never taught kindness. But Elias was right. There was order in it, profit in it, a system that turned pain into currency. Jack's gaze shifted to the mother dog, lying now with her pups tucked against her belly. She looked back at him, her eyes weary but glowing with a quiet strength. He remembered the pit, the rain, her claws scraping against mud as she fought to live. She had survived because she refused silence. Jack's jaw set. The crack had opened. The silence of the town wasn't impenetrable anymore, and through it, truth was beginning to seep. The night was heavy with heat and silence, though the storm had passed days ago. Jack sat by the stove with his shotgun leaning against the wall, the dogs asleep around him. The pups twitched in their dreams, tiny paws kicking against the air, and their mother lay just beyond the circle of firelight, her head raised, ears tilted toward the window, as if she could sense the disturbance before it came. It was past midnight when Jack heard it, the crunch of gravel, the low growl of engines moving in unison. Headlights swept across the yard, cutting sharp angles through the dark. Jack rose his hand, instinctively reaching for the gun. 3 trucks rolled into his drive, their engines idling low, filling the air with a metallic hum. Doors slammed, boots struck gravel. And then another sound, the measured steps of Sheriff Cole, steady and deliberate, leading the pack. Jack stepped onto the porch shotgun, resting in the crook of his arm. The men fanned out behind the sheriff, broad-shouldered, wearing coats too new for honest work, their eyes reflecting the hard gleam of entitlement. The sheriff's face was shadowed under his hat, but his voice carried flat and cold. "Evening, Jack." Jack's jaw tightened. "You picked the wrong night." Cole's eyes flicked toward the shotgun, then back to Jack's face. "Put it down. We don't need to make this harder." The men behind him shifted their boots, grinding on gravel. One spat into the dirt, muttering, "Old fool thinks he can stand alone." Jack didn't lower the gun. He planted his boots firm on the boards. "Say what you came to say." Cole exhaled slowly. "We know you've been poking where you shouldn't, sneaking around barns, filming things that don't concern you. You've got tapes. Hand them over, Jack. Tonight." His voice sharpened. "Before this gets ugly." For a moment, the only sound was the chorus of engines humming behind them. Jack let the silence stretch, then raised his voice steady as iron. "I did film it," he said. "Every cage, every exchange, every dollar changing hands. I've got it all, and it's not staying hidden anymore." A ripple of tension passed through the men. One took a step forward, fists clenched, but Cole shot him a look sharp enough to halt him mid-step. The sheriff turned back to Jack, his voice low and dangerous. "You think a tape's gonna change anything? These families run the county. Judges, bankers, councilmen, they're tied to this. You show that film, you'll bury yourself with it." Jack's grip tightened on the shotgun. His voice dropped to a growl. "Maybe. But at least I won't be the one digging their holes." The air snapped with tension. One man swore under his breath, reaching inside his coat. Jack's muscles coiled, finger-brushing the trigger, and then another voice cut through the night. "Stop right there." Claire stepped out from the shadows at the side of the house, a small camera in her hands. Its red light blinked steadily in the dark. She raised her voice so it carried across the yard. "This is live," she announced. Every word, every threat, every face. Streamed straight to the rescue network. Hundreds of people are watching right now. The men froze. One cursed another, turned his back to hide his face, but it was too late. Claire kept the lens steady, her eyes blazing. "You wanted proof," she said. "Here it is. Not just cages and dogs, people. The ones who come in the night, the ones who think they own silence. The whole county can see you now." The sheriff's face darkened. "You don't know what you've started." Claire's voice was sharp as steel. "I know exactly what we've started." The men muttered angrily, shifting like wolves denied their kill. One slammed a fist against the side of a truck. Another barked, "We'll come back, old man. You can't hide behind that camera forever." Jack raised the shotgun higher, his voice ringing out clear and steady. "Then you'd better pray the world forgets what it's already seen." The standoff stretched brittle as glass. Engines idled, boots scraped. The sheriff's hand twitched at his belt, but the camera's red light glowed like fire in the dark, and none of them dared be the first to shatter it. Finally, Cole spat into the dirt. His voice dripped venom. "This isn't over, Jack." He turned sharply, striding back to his truck. The others followed, muttering curses, their anger thick in the air. Doors slammed, engines revved, and the convoy rolled away into the night, red taillights bleeding into the dark until they were gone. Jack lowered the shotgun, his arms trembling with the weight of what almost was. Claire shut off the camera, her face pale but fierce. "That bought us time," she said. "Not safety. They'll be back." Jack nodded slowly, his breath heavy. He turned toward the house, and there she was, the mother dog standing in the doorway, her silhouette lit faintly by the fire behind her. Her eyes glowed in the dark, steady and unblinking, a witness to the battle fought on her threshold. Jack met her gaze, his throat tight. She did not move, did not flinch. She simply watched, silent as stone, as if to remind him this fight was no longer his alone. Morning came, not with peace, but with noise. Jack awoke to the crackle of voices on the radio, the murmur of neighbors gathered at the fence line, the uneasy stirrings of a town that could no longer pretend it hadn't seen. The night's confrontation had spread faster than wildfire. Claire's broadcast had done its work, images of trucks in Jack's yard, the sheriff's grim face, the men snarling threats into the camera. And with it the truth about the cages, the money, the pitiful cries in the dark. By noon, the phones at the diner rang non-stop. At the feed store, men clustered around the newspaper stand, reading headlines printed too fast to be polished. "Animal ring exposed. Evidence emerges of long-held cruelty." Some voices defended, some denied, but others, many others, finally admitted what they'd long suspected. Jack moved through the town, slowly carrying sacks of feed from his truck. He felt the eyes on him, but they were different now. Some still narrowed, wary or hostile, but others softened, hesitant nods given in passing. At the diner, the waitress pressed a hand to his arm and whispered, "Took courage what you did." Outside the barber shop, a man he barely knew muttered, "Lost a dog myself. Should have spoken sooner." The silence of the town had cracked. Not wide enough yet to break the whole dam, but wide enough to let light in. Days later, the farmhouse was filled with quiet chaos. The pups were growing quickly, their bellies round their paws unsteady as they tumbled across the floor. Claire came with carriers lined with blankets, her face firm, but her eyes wet. "They've got families waiting," she said. "People who've seen the footage, who want to give them homes. Safe ones." Jack crouched on the kitchen floor, letting the pups climb into his lap one last time. They nipped at his fingers, yipped at one another, tiny sparks of life that had somehow survived the pit. His throat tightened as he lifted the first pup into Claire's arms. The mother dog stood close, tense, watching. When the pups whined, she pressed her nose against them, licking their heads, her eyes clouded with confusion. Jack stroked her back gently. "They'll be safe," he murmured. "That's all that matters." One by one, the pups left in Claire's carriers, their cries fading as she loaded them into her truck. Jack stood on the porch, the mother dog at his side, both of them watching as the vehicle rolled down the lane. She whined softly, her body leaning against his leg. Jack reached down, resting his hand on her scarred back. "They're alive because of you," he said. "Because you didn't give up." Her tail flicked once, a small motion, but enough. That evening, the sky broke open in color. The storm clouds had gone, leaving the horizon painted with amber and rose. Jack sat on the porch steps, the shotgun leaning forgotten against the wall. The mother dog settled beside him, her body pressed to his, her eyes fixed on the fields stretching wide and endless before them. For a long time, neither moved. The silence was not heavy now, but filled with the weight of what had been survived, and what still lay ahead. Jack breathed deep, the air carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint smoke of far-off chimneys. He thought of the sheriff of the families who had driven away with curses on their lips, of the men who still believed silence could protect them. He thought of Elias finally speaking truths he had buried for decades. He thought of Claire, her camera, steady, her voice unwavering. And he thought of the dog beside him, who had stared death in the face and still clawed her way upward. He turned to her, his voice rough but sure. "No more pits," he whispered. "No more silence." Her ears twitched at his words. She leaned her head against his knee, eyes calm, steady, as if she understood. The sun dipped lower, the fields glowing gold. In that light, the farmhouse did not look so tired, the scars on her back did not look so cruel. Everything for a breath seemed remade. The fight was far from over. Jack knew that as sure as he knew the weight of the shotgun still resting on the porch. But something had shifted. The darkness was no longer unchallenged. A flame had been lit in himself, in Claire, in Elias, in every silent neighbor now daring to whisper truth. And once lit, it would not be put out. Jack let out a long breath, his hand resting on the dog's back, as they watched the horizon burn with evening fire. From the pit of mud and silence had come this moment, fragile but fierce. Impassable walls had cracked. From the darkness a new light had risen, and neither man nor beast would walk alone into it.